So, Rama, are you going to share the desktop for the presentations, or is Sophie going to do that?
Either way. If Sophie is going to handle it. One person handling would be better, as you said. So I sent my presentation to her, and I don't know if everybody has sent them to her, whoever is using the presentations. I don't know.
The only one who seems to be using slides otherwise is Christine, and she sent them to me. I think I forwarded them on. So I can drive it. I have them on my desktop.
Cool. Okay.
So then, Annie, I see you're the presenter. So what I'll do is I'll give a quick hi to everybody, turn it over to Aaron for a minute or two, and then if you don't mind making me the presenter, I will then share my screen.
Now, Destin. I don't need to keep it, so why don't I just pass it over?
Okay, great.
Seeing you. Are you listed as the ESIP Group 2 organizer?
Nope. I mean, it's my regular name.
I see you. Oh, there's your name. Never mind. I'm going to go ahead.
Annie, that's me.
Oh,
ESIP Group 2 is me, Sophie.
Okay. Great. I'm going to make Justin the presenter now. All right, Justin.
Okay.
You got it.
Great. Okay, we'll give it 2 minutes, and then we'll start right at 3. Okay. Okay. So, well, welcome everybody to the ESIP International Data Week recap, co-held with the monthly ESIP Data Stewardship meeting. I'm going to turn it over to Aaron for brief remarks, and after which we will have our first presentation to be provided by Beth Huffer. Aaron, it's all yours.
Sure, thanks. And I think that I saw most of you 2 weeks ago at Data Week. And all I'll say about it is actually 2 things. One is a big thank you to the ESIP staff. So ESIP offered in-kind support to International Data Week, running International Data Week. And so Annie and Dan Keyes and Annie Burgess and Bruce and I showed up and helped a little bit. And for that, we got, I think, a huge amount of exposure. We had a table, and Annie Burgess had set up a couple of rounds of demos during the 2 breaks. And so big thank you to everybody who was part of those demos and contributed. I think that was also a really neat thing to add, and I know that there were good conversations that came out of it. And then the other thing, and I gave this feedback to RDA specifically when they asked about if we wanted to do International Data Week again, and I think that it was a hugely important event for this broader data community, and it was really, for me, it felt so efficient to get to see all of these people in one place at the same time. And I think the length of the meeting also lended itself to being able to go deeper into conversations instead of just having sort of a quick hi-bye and not getting to the substance. So I'm looking forward to hearing what other people got out of it.
Okay. Thanks, Erin. And before we formally begin, just a reminder to everyone that this meeting is being recorded. Okay, Beth, you ready?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about a theme that I feel is emerging and that I saw both at International Data Week and I've seen in some other contexts recently. So a presentation that I attended during the plenary session, the RDA, was given by Philip Bourne of the National Institutes of Health, and he was talking about a platform, Big Data to Knowledge, or BD2K, which is a platform that the NIH is experimenting with to support research. And of course, I think we've all heard this before, quite a lot, that we need to put the data in the same place as the compute capabilities and the services that are available for processing data and whatnot. And that was kind of the theme of this talk as well. But what was interesting about it especially was that he was comparing it, what they're trying to do at NIH with this BD2K platform, comparing that to Airbnb and other services like that, where there are service providers or providers of something that need to connect with consumers of something, and that and how that works when it's successful. And the point I wanted to raise here that I found most compelling was that critical to success in doing these kinds of online platforms to provide services to consumers of something is the issue of trust. So I wanted to actually focus on that a little bit in this, in sort of telling you what I got out of this this International Data Week, because this seems to be emerging as a really important issue. So just the brief background here on this BD2K platform at NIH. Of course, what they're going for here is a platform where scientists can go to get data and process data and have that all in the same place. But more to the point is, rather than at that, the way things kind of work right now is that the scientists go somewhere and to some siloed data archive, and they get some data and they download it to their computers, and they've installed some software there, and they do some processing of the data to, get it into some condition that they need for their research, and then they publish a paper, and the paper gets published, but the output of whatever they did to manipulate the data doesn't get published and isn't available to anybody, and algorithms that they may have used for working with the data and methods that they may have used are also not available. So the idea here is to provide a platform where scientists can not just publish their papers, but they can also publish the data sets that they produced to in the process of doing their research, and also produce their methods. So they're going for a platform where everything is kind of considered a digital object that can be published and consumed by other scientists. And this is why this issue of trust, I think, comes up and is such a critical issue, because there's a couple of things that I'm hearing all over the place, and I've heard this at two NASA data center user working group meetings recently, and I also heard it at a session at the RDA plenary meeting at International Data Week, that this question of trust and knowing what the algorithms are that are doing some transformation, performing some sort of transformation on data, is just super critical. And until that trust issue gets addressed, it's really hard to create these kinds of platforms that people, we're hearing a lot of talk about these kinds of platforms. And so in that vein, Dr. Bourne was talking about the Airbnb platform and suggesting that we in the science community should look to those kinds of models, because Airbnb is an especially interesting one, right? We've got, a lot of people are opening up their homes maybe to what are complete strangers, and so there's trust issues on both sides. And in science, I think the analogy here is that researchers who are creating new data sets or developing methods for processing data or transforming data in some way for their research need to know that they can make that information available without they have something to lose, right? So there's trust on that side. And similarly on the consumer side, people who may reuse the data sets or may even reuse algorithms or something need to know, or reusing data sets in particular, I think this issue comes up, need to know that whatever transformation processes were done on the data are reliable and didn't produce bad data or didn't introduce errors into data or something like that. And so anyway, I thought that was really interesting. There was a session I attended the next day after that session on brokering services, and again this issue of trust came up, where there was a discussion about how to implement brokering services that might provide data transformation services. So, and in some user working group meetings that I've attended, users have talked about, the possibility of having services out there that could regrid data or reproject data or do some other sort of spatial transformations or other kinds of transformations on data in the cloud or someplace before download, so that scientists could have data already in some transformed state that would be easier for them to work with. And again, this issue of, well, it'd be great, but how can we trust the data that errors haven't been introduced? And so I guess that was kind of a big takeaway for me. And since I'm hearing that trust issue coming up all in a variety of other contexts as well, I thought that was a really interesting outcome of this International Data Week, these sessions for me. And I'll leave it at that. I guess people can comment or ask questions if you want more information.
Thanks, Beth. In the interest of time, let's run through the presentations, and then we could have Q&A. And everyone is invited as well to use the chat feature on GoToMeeting in order to execute the Q&A. So our next speaker is Christine White. Christine has slides which I should pull up.
Oh, well, and we don't have to go through all the slides because I think they're going to be sharing the recordings of these. I actually was able to find the recordings on a really weird, for lack of, I don't mean to judge, but it was kind of an odd TV URL last night. I was going to show my husband the talk, and I Googled it and found the talk. So I can put that link in the chat as well if folks want to watch the video. More or less.
Great. And I just pulled it up on the GoToMeeting.
Oh.
Also.
Okay. Oh, you know what's interesting? Oh, you pulled up the slides. Very good. So I'll post it. I'm going to have to do a little bit of gymnastics to get it out of my text and into the computer, on my work computer, and put it in the chat. So I'll do that after I talk.
Okay.
My presentation was in the realm of the data, was in a section called data stories. And our charge was to tell a data story. And specifically, behind the scenes, I was told to do one that had to do with kids. And since I don't work with kids, it was definitely a challenge for me. So my takeaway, and you'll see this if you watch the video, was really that it's really important that scientists convey their data and their information in a way that the broader public can consume it. And it's not so much a technical means, although technical plays a large role in being able to discover and access and do your own research on the data set, but also making it interesting and intriguing. And I experienced this firsthand through the data story I shared. I stumbled upon a data set. It was a digital, in the geography world, it was a feature data set showing these 5th grade winners of this conservation wildlife contest. So each student had written an essay and created a piece of artwork, and the artwork was individually identifiable through a document identifier, well, more or less a URL, right? But it's essentially a unique thing living on the web that could be leveraged. Yes, you can see this. Thanks, Justin. You can see this is some of the background of the data set. So anyway, the point was these students, in their charge for this contest, and this data set just shows the winners, but there was 11,000 participants over the past 13 years. So essentially, Conservation Wildlife New Jersey is educating over 10,000 5th graders about conservation issues. And then the winners were conveyed in a digital data set that had a URL to their artwork and also a story written from the first person perspective of the endangered animal. And so it was really, I got sucked into it because reading a 5th grader's first person account of an endangered species was entertaining, delightful, heartbreaking, and very motivating for conservation issues. And then paired with this excellent artwork, it made a very intriguing data set. And so my challenge to the audience was just to kind of think about creative ways to engage their audience and to put that stuff on the web so people can discover it. I live 2,500 miles away from these kids, and I care about their data, about their research, because they conveyed their data stories in such a beautiful way. So I have a lot of other things to say regarding themes that came out of that week. I was only there Monday through Wednesday, but I have a whole whiteboard full of notes that I put in preparation for this session, but I don't want to take away from other presenters' time. So maybe when we come back to, what Justin's sharing right now on my slides, you can just, maybe just stop on the Bobcat one. So this, of course, this is my favorite one, because this particular student here, their story talked about how the Bobcat really was codependent or was part of the forest ecosystem, and if the forest was destroyed, the bobcat would be destroyed. And then you see this image of this creature. I mean, you can really see it's almost, I don't mean to get all woo-woo about it, but there's really a connection with how this young artist went to great lengths to have sunlight filtering down, illuminating a fallen tree, and having this bobcat kind of interacting with the fallen tree, and this message of, if the forest is gone, we're gone. I mean, it just gave me chills when I read that story. So that's all I'm going to say on this slide deck. But there's a lot more to talk about. So when we get maybe come back to the discussion on what were our takeaways from the week, I have some other notes. But this was the data story that I had the privilege to share.
Great, thanks, Christine. So we'll move on then. Bob, Chen, were you able to come today?
Yeah, I'm on.
Great, thank you. So Bob is next. So I'll turn it over to him.
Okay, well, I don't have any slides.
Fine.
Just as I'm going to just speak from the perspective of two separate little, I think, focused subgroups that were represented during the week, and it was actually part of it was split across both SciDataCon and the RDA plenary, which is interesting. And for those of you who don't know my background, I did help run the original CoData conferences and been to all the SciDataCons when I was, partly when I was Secretary General of CoData, and then I've also been attending RDA, so it's kind of interesting to see the two groups glued together. So maybe this will have some relevance to that. So the two...
Bob, if I can interrupt, we have a few people who aren't familiar with SciDataCon, so if you wouldn't mind just quickly going through what that is.
Sure. So the first part of International Data Week was called SciDataCon 2016. SciDataCon resulted from the merger of the biennial meetings of both CoData, the Committee on Data for Science and Technology, and the ICSU World Data System. The groups are separate under the ICSU, the International Council for Science umbrella, but they have their separate conferences, and through various things they merged them a few years back into kind of a larger international scientific conference. Last one was in India, in New Delhi, 2 years before. But then there was a plan that came to fruition, which was to glue SciDataCon with the RDA plenary, which happens twice a year rather than every other year. So that's what led to International Data Week. SciDataCons run more as a traditional academic conference, as you may have obviously gathered. RDA plenaries have these kind of working meetings. So I wasn't involved in organization particularly, but I did bring two, or I was involved in two sort of very focused sets of data people. One was a group that ended up having two back-to-back sessions on mapping population infrastructure and human settlements. I had 12 papers scheduled, although one group never showed up. And this is a group that would not normally, or more than half would not normally have come to a conference like this. So it was interesting to get them to come, and you know, it was nice because this group had never really gathered as a group before, and so everybody got to hear what each other was doing. There was both public and private sector participants. We had people from Facebook, Google, Esri, and another small company participate, as well as academics and government types. Just one side story I'll tell is that part of this was actually having a side meeting of this group, and I tried to get SciDataCon to let me have space, and they got all tangled up about, well, I can't let you have space unless we offer it to everybody. And so I actually held it off-site on Tuesday, and we all missed 2 of the sessions and had a meeting at the Crown Plaza about 2 blocks away. Luckily, I had some funds to pay for that. And we had a very productive side meeting. So that was one group. The other group that, session that actually there's 3 now that I think about it. Another group that is a the Research Data Alliance has a legal interoperability interest group, but we had a session in SciDataCon where we could give presentations, and then on Friday of the week we had the working meeting, and that worked out pretty well. I think, again, the mode where people, not including people outside the group, present interesting work in a more academic setting is useful and helps educate a broader community. When you do a RDA working group, it's much more interactive, and in that case we had a document we've been working on for a year and a half to kind of discuss and talk about what to do afterwards. So yeah, that combination of different styles of meeting I think was useful. And then actually the third session I organized was on sort of Earth observations and the Sustainable Development Goals on, I think that was Monday afternoon. And that also followed on a paper I gave at the World Data System Forum on the SDGs to the ICSU World Data System. And so that's another kind of issue of how do you make data communities aware, or this type of scientific data community aware of what's going on in a external community, which in this case is the broad development community, which has its own data people and networks and so forth. And so I think was a different kind of conversation, which is how to expand the interactions between the scientists and applied policy-oriented users. You know, so I find those are all, you know, these conferences give you this opportunity to bring in an international group and be very focused. I kind of wish SciDataCon had been more supportive of the side activities that are useful to do. And whether some of these end up being you know, activities of CODATA or RDA, I think it's up in the air, but those are useful aspects of this kind of meeting. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Bob. We now go to our next speaker, another Bob, Bob Downs from Columbia University, as well as Bob Chen. So Bob, it's all yours.
Oh, great. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Sure
Hello?
can.
Oh, great. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the session Auditing of Trustworthy Data Repositories that I led in the SciDataCon. And the co-leader of that was Steve Kempler, who many of you know. He's the manager of the Goddard Earth Sciences Data Information Service Center, known as JESDISC. It's part of the NASA, it's one of the NASA DACs. And so in our session, we had called for papers that were looking at the challenges for determining, measuring, and meeting the requirements to become a trustworthy data repository, and for maintaining certification, and including looking at the criteria for measuring a repository or its trustworthiness in an objective manner. So for that session, we ended up having 6 talks, and then following the 6 talks, we had the 6 speakers were served as a panel and answered questions from the audience. So it turned out to be a very rich session in that regard. So the 6 speakers were, first was me. I gave an introduction of audit of a scientific data center and discussed different opportunities and approaches associated with that. In doing that, I talked about why it's important to audit research data centers, and how recently we've seen how various announcements about digital repository audits they're becoming quite prominent. We not only see people mentioning that they're getting different types of certificates, but organizations now are offering services and tools and workshops, etc. And so I talked about the costs versus the benefits and different approaches that you would take in terms of planning, preparation, and scheduling, and selecting an audit instrument, and evaluating candidate audit instruments, and looked at how we might think about audits in terms of the frequency. That is it just going to be an internal one-time self-assessment, or we're going to do this often, that is periodic assessments, and are they going to be self-assessments, or are they going to be external? And so it's different ways of thinking about it. And then after my presentation, Shelley Stahl, who many of you know, she talked about the data management maturity model of AGU, and how that's developing and how that fit within the context of other repository assessment instruments that are out there, and how that's being developed and how they conducted some initial tests with that. Then after that, Steve Hughes gave a talk. Many of you might know him. He's at JPL, and he had actually presented a paper that I co-wrote with him on criteria for assessing repository trustworthiness, and that's about an assessment that we had done looking at the ISO 16363 instrument, that's audit and certification of candidate trustworthy digital repositories. Just to quickly give you some background, currently the OAIS standard, Open Archival Information Systems Framework, that is being reviewed, and held in conjunction with that review, and these are 5-year reviews of ISO standards, the ISO 16363 standard, Audit and Certification of Candidate Trustworthy Digital Repositories, is also being reviewed. And so what we did is we conducted a pre-review of the ISO 16363 standard, looking at it in terms of the scope, the hierarchical organization of the standard, and how the metrics actually met the OAIS mandatory responsibilities. And so as a result, we came up with some recommendations for the revision of that standard in terms of the review process. Leslie Ricards also gave a talk during the session, and she talked about the DSA World WDS partnership. That's the Data Seal of Approval and World Data System Partnership, and they've partnered to create a new core for new core requirements for digital repository certification, and they did this under the auspices of a RDA working group, a Research Data Alliance working group. And so she talked about that process, how they came about, and how that's moving forward. And then Mustafa Mukrane, and he's from the World Data System, he gave a talk on the legacy and future of the World Data System certification of data services and networks. And so his talk was following Leslie's talk, and it was really fitting in that regard, because based on that, the new core requirements that they've developed, we're now working towards certification. And then finally, Ingrid Dillo, she talked about the DONS certification efforts, and use case. And so they had undergone at DOMS various different types of assessments, including a test assessment of ISO 16363, the data seal of approval, the World Data System, and I think even the nest storage. She talked about those, and it was particularly interesting how she talked about the cost of doing these, and it caught everybody off guard. And one of the things that came out of that, especially in the question and answer session that we had during the panel discussion, was that if organizations are going to undertake these kinds of efforts because of the expenses, they might want to start with the easier ones, such as the data seal of approval, and maybe just doing a self-assessment with those kinds of instruments, and then moving on further along, such as going for the World Data System, or the DSAWDS core as it is now evolving to, and eventually working their way up to where they're, say, doing a self-assessment using ISO 16363, the audit and certification standard, and for trustworthy repositories, where the cost would be really incurred over time, because each time you're doing one of these different assessments, you're incurring a little more cost because each one's a little more rigorous than the next, to finally where you're doing the higher level ones, and it's not like doing that just from scratch because you've already done a lot of preparation with the earlier ones. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Bob. We now move on to Rama Priyan. Rama is, among other roles, Vice Chair of the ESIP Data Stewardship Committee. And I'll pull up Rama's slides. PDF. Okay. Rama, it's all yours.
I was on mute. Okay, please move to the next one.
Sure.
The slides are primarily for a reminder for myself. I attended 2 events at the International Data Workshop a week, IDW. The first day was Sunday, September 11th, and there was the World Data System, ICSU World Data System Members Forum. And, oh, you're not going to the second chart, okay. And on the 12th and 13th, I was at the SciDataCon. Of course, the SciDataCon started on the evening of September 11th with a plenary session and opening plenary. So, Justin, you're not able to advance the slides?
Yep, I am.
Okay.
So September 12th, September 13th.
Yeah, we're not, it's not moving on our side.
Not moving our, yeah, maybe you need to click on enable editing or something.
Or stop sharing and reshare, just quickly.
Okay.
If it doesn't work, we could also transfer it to Rama, and Rama, you could just run directly.
Yeah, Rama, if you don't mind, I'll make you presenter.
Okay, that's fine. So Bob Brown covered a few things that I was going to mention, so I don't need to go over them. Especially, I attended a session on trusted repositories, so I was going to say a little about that, but I can skip that for sure.
And actually, maybe Sophie, if you could make Rama presenter,
yeah.
I think that would help us.
Okay, give me 1 second. I can change the presenter to Rama.
Okay.
Rama, you should not be able to present.
Okay, let me do this.
Thanks. Yeah, that's weird. I was advancing the slides on my own computer and it didn't show.
Okay. All right. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let me go on to this guy here. All right. So, so I was in the ICSU WDS forum on September 11th. And for those of you who don't know about the WDS, or the World Data System, it has 99 members, of which regular members are people who are the organizations that hold data, like data centers or PACs, or the NPEI data centers and other organizations like that. So there are 65 of those, and there are network members. The Estes project, for example, in NASA is a network member because we coordinate the DACs. And out of the 12 DACs that we have, 9 of them are already members, regular members, and 1 is in process. The other 2 are still waiting to fill out their forms to become members. And there are partner members and associate members. I don't really know a lot of detail about that, so I'll not go into that. And there was a lot of talk about certification processes, and Bob Downs mentioned this. So there is the World Data System and Data Seal of Approval. There are DSA.
Rama,
there are 2 different
there.
Hello? Yeah? Are you able to hear me? Am I fading out?
No, I think you're good.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm not having trouble either.
Yeah, I heard Justin asked somebody, are you there? So I was just wondering. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so the WDS and DSA are 2 organizations that have merged their requirements for certification over the last 2 years. And recertification with WDS used to be every 3 to 5 years before, and now everything is done every 3 years. And I just need to mention that people who become regular members go through the certification process by filling out an application that shows all the requirements. And as I mentioned, the DACs have gone through the 65 regular members and the network members
Rama,
are
you're
shown
cutting
there.
in and out.
Okay.
Hey, Justin, I think that it's your audio. It's not happening for me.
Okay.
Yeah, ditto on that. It sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. So the members fill out these certification requests and get certified. So all the members that are indicated there have gone through the process, and that needs to be repeated every 3 years is what they're saying now. That's a change from before. We did a little bit of mild protest on that, but that didn't fly, so I guess we'll have to fill these out every 3 years. The Knowledge Network Working Group, if you get charts, I've got links to these, a couple of links on this that will be useful for you guys to look at. So the World Data System has a thing called Knowledge Network Working Group that has been putting together across the board metadata catalog that's still not completely in place. In fact, the Estes project has been working with them to ensure that the stuff that we have in our common metadata repository is directly linked from them, as opposed to them copying all the stuff that we have. So that's one thing that's going on here. And they're doing a metadata catalog in the intention goal to catalogs so that people can go to one place and find out across the world what's going on in the different members of the World Data System. And then there is a thing called the Knowledge Network. They had some kind of graphic that showed different kinds of entities being linked together. And so it's a web-based interlinked repository of relationships between actors and entities that make up our research landscape. So they can link people, institutions, projects, research disciplines, topics, funding resources, and the like, and of course data centers and data and so on. So that is a useful thing. and they're depending on semantic web technology there, and that again is in pilot state right now. So they talked about that. And there were several WDS members who made presentations about their data centers and their accomplishments and lessons learned and so on. And we had a poster session for 2 hours in the afternoon, and most of the data centers represented at the meeting had posters. And I've got a link here that gives you details and links to presentation charts. In fact, I spoke to Mustafa Mukrain and requested that all the presentations from WDS and the SciDataCon be made available online. And he said he will work towards that. It may take a couple of months to get all the permissions needed from the speakers, but eventually all this will become available and linked to the agenda. So that we should be looking for that later. And SciDataCon, I'm just going to say which sessions I attended. I wanted to mention the plenary session for one. There were interesting presentations from WDS Data Stewardship Award winners for 2015 and 2016. Every year, WDS puts out a call for nominations for Data Stewardship Awards, and these go to early career people, typically under 40 years of age. And so in 2015, our own Oak Ridge DAC person, Yashing Wei, got the award at the time, and he gave an in-person presentation at the plenary session. And in 2016, Boris Biskeborn from Alfred Wegener Institute, Helmholtz Center for Polar and Marine Research, he gave a video presentation. Actually, he was in Siberia doing a field study, so he could not attend the meeting in person, but he had prepared a video, and that was shown. It was quite interesting. And then, other than the plenary, I attended a few sessions which were of particular interest to me: managing science data, federal agency perspective, data fitness, what are the processes and components. So I had this was about reusability of data. So I had a presentation about the ESIP information quality cluster in that session. And there were several other very interesting presentations there as well. And trustworthy data repositories have already been talked about by Bob Downs. And there was a session on data citation, past, present, and future. There was some discussion about dynamic citations there and RDA recommendations that have come out recently. And sustainable business models for data repositories was a very interesting session where they were talking about data centers needing to be maintained from infrastructure, funding from government organizations versus cost recovery from users, cost recovery from depositors, all kinds of different models. And there was a lot of there was a guy who gave a very pessimistic talk, and there were people who gave optimistic talks, and it was quite an interesting session. Linking local and indigenous communities with researchers for improving access and discovery of ethically open data and knowledge was a session about primarily about getting the native Arctic people. Yeah.
Would you mind?
Hello?
Ruth is just about ready, so if you wouldn't mind wrapping up real quick.
Yeah, I'm just about done here. So new approaches in international partnerships, and I had a presentation there in that session as well. Okay, I'm done. That was the last chart.
Great. Okay, thanks, Rama. Next but not least is Ruth Duer from the Ronin Institute. After Ruth's presentation, which should be between 5 and 8 minutes or so, we'll go on to Q&A. I would like to announce, though, that for those who would be getting on to the Semantic Technologies call, we will finish in time to allow you to get to the beginning of that call, so don't worry. Ruth, it's all yours.
Okay, so the first thing I want to note is that The SciDataCon week was actually really almost a week and a half, because the previous week, on the Thursday and Friday of the previous week, there were 2 simultaneous workshops in the Denver area of interest to this group. One was on rescuing data, which one of the projects I'm on had people at. I was not there. And then the other one was on physical samples, and actually I was in an AGU council meeting, so I missed both of them. But they were there, and so those meetings happened. On Sunday, I actually attended the first RDA type side meeting, which was on NISO RDA group working on data privacy implications of research data. It was basically billed as a symposium and ran all day. It had John Wilbanks there, who gave a very excellent talk about big company data and research, and how terms like privacy and research and data, and who's a researcher, are right at the moment very contested things, and that's a problem. And there were a number of other speakers, such as Micah Altman, Paul Burton, Christine Borgman, whose basic advice is, if you can't protect it, don't collect it. And so that was a very good day. All of the symposium is available online, so I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Just Google NISO RDA, private data privacy implications of research data. And I was there for the rest of the week. Getting the incentives right was one of the sessions that I thought had a lot of interesting things in it, because it had experiences from repositories about what things were working and not. Some of the things I think we knew already. For example, Simon Cox was talking about how the 2 important things in terms of incentives tend to be science maturity and whether or not the researchers can consider themselves to be a community, or in other words, if there's a community who needs that infrastructure. I also attended several semantics related sessions, and theoretically co-chaired a session with Mark Parsons on data scientists, which had some interesting talks, one by Kevin Ashley, who basically said that, you know, the people who are good data people are generally generalists, but that domain expertise, even expertise to some level in several domains, is also important, and that there aren't any really good names, because the data scientist name has been usurped by statisticians. Peter Fox is claiming that informatics is the underpinnings of data professionals, and he had a nice diagram that a lot of people were using, one of these Venn diagrams that shows that one of the big issues we have is where computer geeks and data people and data get together without any of the underlying ethical frameworks in place, leading to issues of privacy, etc. So that was a very interesting session. Also of interest was the fact that there were 2 different perspectives on the National Snow and Ice Data Center and what it means to be a data professional. One coming from sort of the DAC-centric world, and the other coming from the indigenous communities of the far north, people working with those kinds of data world. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Several of the other sessions I attended have already been mentioned. I will note that there was Michael Altman's presentation has slides that I think the ESIP data quality group should look at, because much of his discussion, though it was mostly on privacy, was actually relevant to the data quality and data quality use case work that ESIP is doing at this point in time. I attended many of the RDA sessions, some of which have already been talked about. Interestingly enough, RDA is now kind of has two groups that are working on, data management from different ends of the spectrum. There is the agile data curation, which is working on sort of we have the data, but we get new audiences over time. What do we do about that? And how do we have to morph the data, create new products, et cetera, to satisfy those needs? Whereas the, I forget the exact term they use, but it's data management plans that update themselves over time, where you start to think about data management plans as not being a static document, but a plan that is morphed. You write it prior to, as part of your grant process. But if you get funded, then you update it with more details and more details and more details, and eventually it becomes the metadata that ends up in whatever repository you've been working with all along. Repository has metadata about that data that you end up delivering to them down the line. So you can see where the two groups kind of have a little bit overlap there, where things tend to merge at the repository, but that one is looking way up at the front and the other is perhaps focused more on the back end of the data processes. But I think the general conclusion of both groups was that they need to talk. I also gave a couple of demos, one on natural language processing and machine learning technologies that are openly and freely available that people can use, and the other on the Data Conservancy, which is now has technologies that actually mine references for data and journal articles and people and organizations and things of that source, and has a front-end visualization of these. And that's actually available for people to play with. For example, if you have ever written an IEEE article, you can get the DOI of that article and plug it into the URL. I can put it in the chat here in a second, and go look and see, what an open linked data version of your paper and whatever data it has and whatever references it has, and start chasing it in a Triplestore that is being actively maintained. And that Triplestore actually can accept data from a lot of different places, so there's actually a public API to it. At this point, it's expected to be a long-term entity, currently hosted by JHU, but like I said, the Center for Open Science is now connected to it. So for example, the ESIP projects that are in that could try that out, because you can create RMaps about your project, which includes information about funding and who you are and your data, etc., and push that. So really long week. Practically, I'm not sure if they should glue them together again, because a whole week is 7 days is a lot.
Yep. Thanks, Ruth. Questions for any of the presenters? David Maroni, I see one just popped up, so if you don't mind echoing it. David? Okay, any other questions?
Justin, in case David doesn't have a mic available to him, I'll just speak it out for him.
Sure.
So, Ruth, the question is for you. David says, are there any efforts to reclaim the term data scientist to those who are actually scientifically trained and also work with science data, whether it be data processing, data stewardship, calibration, validation, etc.?
Well, I think there's plenty of us who would like to do that, but I don't know that we're going to succeed. For example, Mark Parsons kept bringing it up everywhere I saw him. But, and and it is true the Data Science Journal has been around for, I don't know, decades. And that is, statistician is not the kind of paper you find in that journal. So I really don't know what to say about it. I think it's very sad that term is being usurped.
So Ruth,
yeah, there
if
was
I
a really
can jump in, I mean,
so there's an interesting graph shared about what calling the job is and how much people are calling themselves that particular job title, not necessarily data scientists, but subsets of it, and how much they regularly earn, which is a very interesting article. Side note.
Indeed. Bob presented that.
Well, Bob Downs did the poster that had some of that data. But the thing is, it's not just statisticians. I mean, part of the problem is, and that was part of the issue about calling it, International Data Week, is there's at least 4 or 5 other communities that claim the word data. There's a whole community in the commercial sector, which is, of course, driving some of the data science education and other activities where, they have meetings with thousands of people in them regularly. And there's a health data community, there's a development data community, and each of them have their own professions and sort of subcultures or whatever you call it that claim data science. So it's not, so there's a bunch of people competing, and they don't get that there's a scientific community that's focused on data that's distinct from these other communities.
Something, just a side note before we go to another thing that came up on it's a different note, but I want it to be captured regarding a theme throughout the whole week. It's a different topic, but it was about ethical use of data. And particularly it came up in a number of things. There was a gentleman named Chris Horsethief who did a great presentation. He represents one of the local native peoples about how to work with indigenous folks and how to help them, the things to consider that aren't really typically considered, like how they can maintain ownership of the resources and co-ownership of defining the study, cultural considerations. Similarly, of course, there's perspectives on working with children data. And then the gentleman, Uni, who presented after my data story, talked about he's Doctors Without Borders. So invisible populations are the last ones, the elderly, the infirm are the last ones to come forward for help. And he had their data, they have a ton of data that they have to collect, but surprisingly small number of requests for the data. And possibly that could be just that people don't know it's available and don't understand how they can use it. So I just wanted to chime in that was a theme that came out throughout the week as well regarding some of, in contrast to some of the more technical discussions.
Great, thank you everybody. I had promised the Semantic Web folks that they'd be able to get on to their meeting at 4, so I'm going to call this meeting to a close. Thanks a lot to all our presenters. It seems International Data Week was really productive in driving individual research as well as collective ESIF effort forward. I'll give you, for those of you on the East Coast, have a great rest of the afternoon. For those of you on the West Coast, have a great longer afternoon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.